A lush garden once floated above a desert. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon. It's one of history's great mysteries, but the real wonder you couldn't see, it was the water, the system that kept it alive. So we're going to rebuild that system, the lost hydraulic system, the machines they might have used. Machines to lift water, millions of gallons of it, up into the sky. And the question is how? How did they do that with no modern tools, and then why? Why has all the evidence of it just vanished? And what does that say about us? That drive to build the impossible. Babylon was built on the Mesopotamian plains. This was Nebuchadnezzar's city, a place of power on the Euphrates. Its walls were wide enough for chariots. The Ishtar Gate was covered in blue tiles and golden dragons. The city was a statement, a declaration. And in that center of engineering, that's where the story of the Hanging Garden starts. Later writers described it. They described a terrace structure, a green mountain built by hand, stone columns holding up layers of soil, trees growing not from the ground but from the palace itself. The reason for it is part of the story, a gift from a king to a homesick queen, or maybe it was grander than that, a symbol of power so complete it could defy nature. Commanding a river is one kind of power. Commanding the sky, making rain fall where you want it, that's for a ruler who believes he can reshape the world. That's the scale of it. Babylon was already a wonder. The gardens would be its living masterpiece. But a masterpiece that size asks one relentless question. In a land of clay and seasonal rivers, how do you keep a mountain alive? The city's ambition sets the stage, but the real drama starts with a simple need: water. The Hanging Gardens are described as impossibly lush. That's the central contradiction. A green mountain thriving in the heart of Mesopotamia, but Mesopotamia in summer is a furnace. Rainfall is scarce. The land away from the rivers is just hard, sun-baked plain. So the enigma is how a garden like that could not just survive, but actually flourish there. To see the scale of the problem, you look at the other ancient wonders. The Great Pyramid at Giza is in a desert, but it's stone. It's a monument of stillness. The Temple of Artemis, the statue of Zeus, they were built in places with ample water near rivers or springs. Their challenge was artistry, construction. The gardens presented a completely different challenge. They weren't a static sculpture. They were a living ecosystem. And a living system in that environment would demand a constant, colossal supply of water. Every leaf, every root on those terraces would have been screaming for moisture under that sun. The logistical nightmare becomes clear when you picture the numbers. A garden of that legendary size, with trees and exotic plants, would have needed millions of gallons of water every single day. And not just delivered, but lifted, raised potentially hundreds of feet into the air to the highest terraces. This isn't a task for buckets and a line of workers. The sheer volume, the height, it becomes a problem of physics, of engineering. So you have this inherent contradiction, a described paradise against an environmental reality. That's what transforms the Hanging Gardens from a simple legend into a profound puzzle. The story insists the garden existed, the land insists it could not, and the only thing that can resolve that standoff is a machine, a lost hydraulic system, something of breathtaking ingenuity. The written record starts in Greece and Rome, long after the gardens would have existed. These historians wrote about them with a kind of awe, but from a distance. Their accounts aren't blueprints, they're echoes, and echoes get distorted. By time, by retelling, you have to listen to what they say and maybe more to what they don't. One detailed account comes from a geographer, Strabo, writing around the time of Christ's birth. He described a garden built on vaulted terraces, hollow pillars filled with soil to hold the roots of large trees. But the key detail is this. He wrote that water was raised to the highest level by means of screws. The Archimedes screw is a famous device. A spiral inside a tube, it lifts water when you turn it. But Strabo was writing long after Archimedes lived. So was he describing a real Babylonian technology or just projecting a Greek invention back onto a legend? The mention is specific. It points to a machine, a deliberate piece of engineering. It's our first written clue that the solution was mechanical, not magical. Then there's a Babylonian priest who actually lived in Babylon. He wrote in the 3rd century before the Common Era. His account should be the most reliable, the closest to a primary source, but here's the frustration. His original writings are completely lost. We only know of him through later Greek historians, like it's a case of historical telephone. A Babylonian voice filtered through a Greek lens, then passed down. What did know? Did he see maintenance records, talk to engineers? We'll never hear his direct testimony. That's the fundamental challenge with these texts. They're secondary, sometimes tertiary sources. The authors were often travelers, scholars compiling stories, not eyewitnesses. They wrote for audiences who loved the spectacular, the monumental. Exaggeration was part of the genre. A garden becomes a mountain. A clever irrigation system becomes a miraculous fountain. The Chinese whispers effect is profound. With each retelling, practical details could fade, while the sense of wonder grew. So we're left with fragments, contradictory descriptions, vague dimensions, and that one mention of a screw. Yet from within this fog of legend, a consistent concept emerges. Every account that tries to explain the gardens hits the same problem, the water. And the solutions they suggest are always devices, machines for lifting. They don't describe prayers, they describe engineering. This collective insistence across different writers from different cultures tells us something. The memory of the hanging gardens was linked in the ancient mind with a feat of hydraulic machinery. The written clues, however faint, point in one direction, toward a lost system of ingenuity. But words on a page can only hint at form. To understand the machine, you have to turn from the library to the workshop, to the simple tools that would have made the impossible seem just difficult. That mention of a screw. It's a clue, but it's a problem. The device is unmistakable. It's the Archimedes screw. A giant corkscrew inside a tube. You lower one end into water, turn the crank, and the spiral lifts the water up and out. It's continuous. A single person can operate it, moving a lot of water with steady work. It's exactly the kind of machine you'd picture on those terraces with teams of workers in a cycle of lifting. But then there's the name Archimedes. He lived in the 3rd century BCE. King Nebuchadnezzar, who built the gardens, ruled in the 6th century BCE. That's a gap of nearly 300 years. So if the account is accurate, it describes a Greek invention being used centuries before it was invented, an anachronism, a thing out of its proper time. So how do you resolve that? One possibility is the historians got it wrong. They were writing centuries later, and they used a technology they knew, the efficient Greek screw, to explain a feat they couldn't understand. They retrofitted a solution from their own time onto a problem from the past. It's an easy error, but there's another possibility. What if the screw was a Greek invention at all? What if it was Babylonian, later refined by the Greeks? The transmission of ideas across the ancient world was slow but constant. Trade routes connected Mesopotamia to Egypt to the Mediterranean. Knowledge traveled with merchants, with diplomats. Could Babylonian engineers have developed a primitive helical pump? They were masters of hydraulics. They built canals, dams, the earliest water-lifting device, the Shadoof, a counterweighted lever. The step from a Shadoof to a screw is a giant leap in mechanics, but not impossible. Maybe they experimented with spirals of wood or baked clay, finding a rotating helix could move more water with less effort. A proto-screw, a rough ancestor to the Greek design. That would make the account not an anachronism, but a fragmented memory of an older technology. It opens a debate about innovation. Did ideas spring up independently, or were they always passed along and improved? The lost hydraulic system of the Hanging Garden sits right at the heart of that. If a screw was used, it represents a pinnacle of ancient mechanical thought. But to find it, you have to look beyond texts, to the earth of Babylon itself. What could the soil and stones tell us about machines made of wood and bronze that vanished ago? A screw needs a hand to turn it, a human engine, but the river was right there. The Euphrates flowing past the walls, a constant force. So what if the river itself provided the power to use the river's own energy to lift its water? That idea brings us to the Noria, a massive wooden wheel standing upright in the current, pots fixed around its rim. The flowing water pushes against paddles and the wheel turns. Each pot dips into the river, fills, is carried to the top, and then tips out into a channel. It's a self-perpetuating cycle, the river lifting its own water. No oxen to feed, no teams of laborers, just the current. This technology was known, used in Roman Syria, probably earlier origins too. So for Babylon, the question isn't if they knew the principle, it's if they could scale it to meet that demand. Imagine a series of these great wheels along the bank, each one taller than a house, creaking as they turn. A chorus of wood and water. Their placement would be a calculation. You'd need a strong current to drive them, but not so violent it shatters the frame. The axles bearing all that weight would have to be monumental timbers, maybe reinforced with bronze. The pots, baked clay for durability, dozens on each wheel. The output would be staggering. A single large Noria can lift thousands of gallons an hour, day and night. Now link several together. The first wheel lifts water into a primary channel. That channel feeds a second wheel, set higher on the bank, which lifts it again. You create a mechanical staircase. Water climbing from the river level up to the garden's foundation. It's an energy-efficient idea. It solves the scale. Human-powered devices would need an army. A Noria system once built runs on the environment. The lifted water wouldn't go straight to the top terraces, of course. It would fill cisterns first. Massive reservoirs at the base, holding tanks, the pressurized heart. From there, the water could be distributed upward, through a network of smaller channels. Maybe even using those human-turned screws for the final lifts to the highest levels. A hybrid system. The river does the heavy lifting. Human ingenuity directs the flow. The logistics are still immense, maintaining wooden wheels in a wet environment, preventing rot, replacing broken pots, a permanent workshop at the water's edge. But it's a system that fits the capabilities of the time. It uses the landscape as a tool. It turns the primary obstacle, the river's flow, into the solution. Yet if such an elegant machine existed, where is its trace? Why no post holes for its supports? No fragments of the great clay pots? The answer might be in the most fragile material. The very thing the system was built to carry, water moving in a circle. That's the idea behind the chain pump. Not one bucket, not a screw, it's a loop. A chain with discs or little buckets all linked together inside a closed wooden pipe. You put one end in the water, you pull the chain. And as each disc goes up the pipe, it fits tight, it seals, and it pulls water up with it. At the top, the chain goes over a wheel, the water pours out into a ditch, and the empty discs go back down to start over. It's a conveyor belt, a constant flow. For the hanging gardens, that's a useful answer. The real advantage is staging. You don't build one pump to lift water all the way up hundreds of feet at once. You build a series. One pump lifts water maybe 30, 40 feet to a tank. Then another pump lifts it from that tank another 30 feet. It's a relay. Every stage is manageable. Every pump is the same. The system is modular. You can fix it. And you can power it in a way that solves the labor problem. You connect the drive wheel to a treadmill, a big wooden wheel on its side. You could have oxen walk in a circle, pushing it with their weight. Or you use people, enslaved people, climbing the steps of a rotating treadmill, their endless walking turning into the mechanical pull of the chain. That's where the mystery gets darker. The engineering is one part, the social engine is another. To picture a room under the gardens, a big dim space, just the sound of creaking wood and the slow rhythm of footsteps. A system of beauty and life above, held up by a system of repetition and toil below. It adds a logistical layer. This isn't just moving water, it's moving people. Feeding them, housing them, organizing them in shifts to keep the cycle going. The gardens would have needed a whole unseen workforce, a hidden city just for maintenance. And this idea wasn't just in one place. We know chain pumps were used in ancient China by the 2nd century BCE for mines and irrigation. The Hellenistic world later had similar devices, so the knowledge was out there across big distances. Could it have got to Babylon? The Silk Road wasn't official yet, but trade routes for ideas, for technology, they were old. A traveler's story, a captured engineer, a gift, concepts could travel. The chain pump shows a specific, sophisticated understanding of water and continuous motion. If it was part of the lost system, it means a Babylon connected to a wider world of innovation, taking the best ideas to build their paradise. But it also makes you see the real cost of a wonder like that. A cost measured not in stone but in steps. The simplest answer is tempting. But before screws or pumps there was the Shadoof, a long pole balanced on a crossbeam. On one end a bucket. On the other a heavy weight. You pull the bucket down into the water, fill it, and the weight swings it back up. It's simple. A child could understand it. For thousands of years this was the tool that watered Mesopotamia. It lifted water a few feet. It watered small plots. It was the baseline. But then you hold it against the hanging gardens. The scale collapses. Let's do the math. One Shadoof, one person, maybe 200 gallons in a full day. Now think of a garden the size of a palace, full of trees under a desert sun. It would need hundreds of thousands of gallons, maybe millions, every day. To do that with Shadoofs, you'd need an army, not dozens, thousands, all lifting synchronized from dawn to dusk. You need to house them, feed them, supervise them. The space for the Shadoofs themselves lined up would be enormous, and that's just to lift the water a few feet. To get it to the top, you'd have to stage them. One bank lifts water into a low channel, then another bank lifts it from there to a higher one, tier after tier. The inefficiency multiplies, the labor force balloons, it becomes absurd. It's not just a numbers problem, it's an energy problem. The work is brutal, repetitive. Maintaining that effort year after year stretches belief. It turns the gardens from beauty into an engine of pure exertion. The Shadoof is the old way, the village way. The hanging gardens demanded a new way, a mechanical way, a way that amplified power. The inadequacy of the Shadoof shows the silhouette of the lost system. It wasn't just bigger, it was a different category of thought. It had to be. The impossibility of the Shadoof is what points toward the gears, the wheels, the screws. It forces the leap. A machine is only as strong as its weakest part. The screws, the wheels, the chains, those are the ideas. But to hold water, to move it under pressure for decades, you need the right materials. The physical reality of that lost hydraulic system would have been built from the earth itself, transformed by fire and ingenuity. The most fundamental component would have been the pipes. And for that, Babylonian engineers had a perfect local solution: baked clay. The plains of Mesopotamia are rich in alluvial clay, a resource they had mastered for bricks, for tablets, for vessels. For plumbing, they would have crafted cylindrical pipe sections, each about 2 or 3 feet long with flanged ends. One pipe's narrow end would fit into the next pipe's wider end. A simple modular system, but clay is porous, it can crack. And under constant water pressure, even the smallest leak would be catastrophic, over miles of piping. So they sealed it with bitumen. Bitumen is a natural tar, a sticky petroleum seep abundant in the region. For the Babylonians, it was the ancient world's duct tape and waterproof sealant all in one. Archaeological digs at Babylon have uncovered bitumen-lined reservoirs and canals. They would have heated the thick substance until it became liquid, then painted it onto the clay pipe joints, even coating the insides of crucial channels. It created a flexible, impermeable barrier, the glue that held the entire vascular system of the gardens together. This wasn't a guess. It was applied material science. They understood the properties of their local resources and exploited them perfectly. For the high-stress points, though, the places where mechanical force met hydraulic flow, clay might not have been enough. The axle of a great Noria, bearing tons of weight and constant friction, would need something tougher. Here bronze enters the picture, an alloy of copper and tin. Bronze was the high-tech metal of the age, strong, corrosion-resistant, capable of being cast into complex shapes. A bronze sleeve for a wooden axle would reduce wear. Bronze pins could hold crucial joints. Perhaps even the discs of a chain pump, if they used one, might have been bronze, sliding within a wooden casing. The use of metal would have been sparing, reserved for the heart of the machine because it was valuable. But its presence marks a leap, from simple ceramics to true mechanical engineering. Then there's the question of lead. The Romans later became famous for their lead pipes, but lead was known in Mesopotamia too. It's softer, easier to mold into long, seamless runs. Could they have used it for key sections where flexibility was needed? Possibly. But lead also poisons water. Whether through observation or accident, they might have avoided it for the garden's drinking supply, sticking with clay and bitumen for most channels. The archaeological record from Babylon shows a preference, and stone for water conveyance. It was a durable, safe choice. The true test of these materials wasn't in a workshop but in constant operation. Imagine the stress, water hammer from sudden valve closures, the relentless pressure in an uphill pipe, the grinding friction of a moving part. The system had to be maintainable. A broken pipe section could be dug up and replaced. A worn bitumen seal could be reheated and reapplied. This points to a deeper understanding. They weren't just building a monument. They were building a living utility, with repair and longevity in mind. The silent evidence from digs, the fragments of lined canals, the bitumen-coated brick, it whispers of a civilization that didn't just dream of controlling water. They mastered the very substances needed to command it. Yet, if their craftsmanship was so advanced, why is the physical evidence for the gardens themselves so maddeningly elusive? The answer may lie not in what they built, but in what they built upon. The system's genius wasn't just about lifting the water, it was how it delivered it. The gardens themselves, the structure, that was the machine. Those vaulted terraces, the hollow pillars the writers described, they weren't just empty spaces for soil. They were conduits, hidden arteries. Inside those thick walls, channels of baked clay and bitumen could have run upward, carrying the garden's lifeblood from one level to the next. A screw mechanism turning inside a tower that wouldn't be some separate tool. It would be built in. its housing part of the masonry from the start. The architecture and the engineering weren't two different things. They were one thing, that's the shift. The hanging gardens weren't a building with a garden on top. They were a hydraulic organism, a single living system made from stone and earth. Each terrace wasn't a floor. It was a station in a water cycle. At each level, the lifted water wouldn't just spill onto the plants. It would pour into a collection pool first. A small decorative reservoir that served a few purposes. It was a holding tank to regulate the flow, a pressure equalizer. And from that central pool, a network of smaller channels could radiate outward, like veins from a heart, spreading moisture evenly across the whole terrace. Any excess water, the overflow from irrigation, could then be channeled not to waste, but into drains built into the terrace floor. Drains that would funnel it down, maybe to be collected and recirculated. Or to feed the level below. That creates a cascading efficiency. The water works its way down through the structure, serving multiple layers of plants on its journey. The whole edifice becomes a circulatory system. The walls are the vessels, the pools are the organs, the flow of water is its breath. This holistic view solves a practical puzzle. Maintaining a machine that complex would need constant access. If the screws and pipes and valves were buried deep inside the walls, how did engineers service them? The answer is probably in the design of those vaulted substructures. Those hollow spaces weren't just for root growth. They were maintenance corridors, access shafts, dark, cool passages where a worker could move through the belly of the garden, listening for the drip of a failing seal, ready to patch a joint with fresh hot bitumen. The beauty above depended on a hidden utilitarian world below. That's the real masterpiece of ancient design. The architect had to think like an engineer. The engineer had to think like a gardener. The gardener had to understand hydraulics. It was a collaboration across fields of knowledge, all aimed at one audacious goal: to make a river climb a mountain they built themselves. But if this integrated machine was so brilliantly conceived, so solidly built, why did it leave no trace for us to find? The silence of the archaeological record becomes its own question, a deafening one. We might have been looking in the wrong place, for the wrong king. A single scholar changed the entire question. Doctor had a radical idea. The hanging gardens weren't in Babylon. They were never built by Nebuchadnezzar. She says they were in Nineveh, that was the Assyrian capital, built by King Sennacherib a full century earlier. If that's true, it moves a wonder of the ancient world. Her evidence doesn't come from Greek poets, it comes from the Assyrians. Sennacherib left inscriptions carved in stone. He boasts about his palace and a marvelous garden. He calls it a wonder for all people, and he describes in precise technical language how he watered it. He talks about bringing water from distant mountains through a vast network, canals and aqueducts, an engineering project of staggering scale. One canal was over 50 miles long, cut through solid rock. This wasn't just irrigation. It was a monumental state-sponsored system designed to supply his capital. And then there's the machine. In his own words, Sennacherib describes something extraordinary. He writes of making great cables and chains of bronze, and a new invention, an endless spiral like the shape of a snail shell, that lifted water to a great height. He calls it a lasting wonder. This isn't a later Greek historian guessing. This is the king who built it, documenting his own innovation. A bronze screw. A century before Archimedes was even born, that one piece of evidence solves the anachronism. It puts the technology we imagine, the screw, in the right time and place, with a named inventor. Sennacherib's garden wasn't a gift for a homesick queen. It was a symbol of total imperial control, a display that he could command water itself, bend the landscape to his will. The implications are deep. If the gardens were in Nineveh, then the search for the lost hydraulic system shifts north, to the ruins of that Assyrian city, near modern-day Mosul. And Assyrian engineering isn't a mystery. We have their aqueducts. We have the ruins of their massive waterworks. The archaeological traces are more concrete. Theory links the legendary gardens to a known civilization, one with a proven record of exactly the kind of mega-hydraulics the gardens would need. It challenges the foundation of the story we think we know. It suggests that over centuries, the fame of the gardens survived, but their origin faded. Later writers, hearing of a miraculous Eastern garden, just attached it to the most famous Eastern city they knew, Babylon. The name eclipsed the truth, so we're left with a choice. Do we keep searching the sands of Babylon for a ghost, or do we follow the bronze screw to the stone canals of Nineveh, where the machine might have left its true, lasting mark? Sennacherib built his machines in stone. You can see it. About 40 miles from Nineveh, there's a place called, in the hills there, you find an aqueduct. the oldest one of its kind we know about. It's over 900 feet long, a massive limestone channel held up on these pointed arches. You stand in front of it and the scale is immediate. This wasn't a small project, it was a statement. It was part of a system, a 50-mile canal network to bring water from the mountains to Nineveh, to the palace gardens. The aqueduct is the proof, the physical evidence. The inscriptions weren't just boasts. Look at how it's built. The channel is made from cut limestone blocks, fitted together precisely. The inside is smooth so the water flows fast, but the real innovation is underneath. The arches. Before this, water channels were ditches or tunnels. Here they had to cross a valley, so they built up. They built these pointed arches to carry the channel high above the ground. That's a revolutionary idea. It's bridging. Using architecture to defy the land, to keep the water on a steady downhill slope no matter what's underneath. Each arch holds the weight of all that water. The whole structure shows an understanding of load, of stability. They built this to last. Now the parallel. This aqueduct is macroengineering, a large-scale solution to move water. A hanging garden would need microengineering, the small-scale delivery of that water to plants on a structure. But the mindset is the same. It's the same school of thought. The same civilization that could survey 50 miles, cut through bedrock for a canal, and build this aqueduct. That civilization had the technical capacity for the garden. They thought in systems. Controlling water meant controlling the environment on a grand scale. The aqueduct is the supply line. The garden's machinery, the screws, the chains, that's the distribution network. One feeds the other. The stones that tell us about the workforce, the organization, the quarrying, the transport, the masons. Building this was a logistical feat. It required managing thousands of people. It required a bureaucracy. That's the same administrative machine you'd need to maintain a complex garden. To coordinate the repair crews, the teams tending the lifting devices. The aqueduct shows us the backbone, the institutional might behind the beauty. So if the theory is right, the lost hydraulic system of the Hanging Gardens isn't completely lost. It has a sibling, a surviving relative. The aqueduct is a frozen moment of that technology. It grounds the legend in a solid archaeological reality. It shows us the kind of minds that were at work. Minds that saw a distant river and said, "We'll bring it here." Minds that saw a dry hillside and said, "We'll make it bloom." The garden may have vanished, but its source, this waterway, still stands. The real wonder was never just the garden. It was the vision that made it possible. A vision carved in limestone spanning valleys, all for the sound of flowing water. A river isn't just water, it's a force, a moving landscape. And for the gardens to be there, that force had to be captured, lifted. The core challenge is hydraulic. You have this massive river, the Euphrates, flowing at its own level. And then you have a garden, maybe hundreds of feet above it. That vertical distance from the river's surface to the highest terrace, it's a barrier. In engineering terms, it's static lift. You have to give the water enough energy to raise its mass against gravity. Every foot of lift is work. For a trickle, it's manageable. But for the torrent a legendary garden would need, the work becomes colossal. It's like pushing a heavy cart up a steep hill. The higher you go, the harder you push. And then imagine the cart is an endless stream of liquid. And the hill never ends. That was the problem. This is where hydraulic head becomes crucial. It's a simple idea. Head is potential energy stored in water because of its height. Water at the top of a tower has high head. It wants to fall. And that desire to fall can be used to do work, to turn a mill wheel, or to supply pressure for irrigation. But to create that head, you have to put the energy in. You have to lift the water. So the whole system is an energy conversion loop. You spend energy to create head, and then you use that head to distribute the water with force across the terraces. The lost system was, at its heart, an energy machine. Could a series of devices have made a water staircase? The idea is compelling. Instead of one impossible lift, you design a relay. At the riverbank, a massive Noria, turned by the current, lifts water into a primary channel 10 feet up. That channel flows to a holding tank. From that tank, a second device, maybe a chain pump powered by oxen, lifts it another 20 feet. Stage by stage, the water climbs. Each lift is manageable. Each device is a copy of the last, just placed higher. The system becomes modular, repairable. The summit isn't reached in one heroic effort, but through a patient, mechanical procession. The river powers the first step, and then human or animal ingenuity takes over for the rest. This staircase approach mirrors the garden's own terrace design. The architecture and the hydraulics become reflections of each other. But the river wasn't a static tool. The Euphrates and Tigris are seasonal. Their flow swells with spring melt and dwindles in the summer heat. An engineer couldn't design for an average. He had to design for the extremes. In flood season, the rushing current could destroy delicate water-lifting wheels, tear them from their moorings. In drought, the river level might drop so low that the first Noria's pots no longer reached the water. The system had to be resilient. That meant adjustable intakes, wheels that could be raised or lowered on their axles. It meant bypass channels and overflow weirs to manage excess water. It meant digging diversion canals, branching arteries off the main river, to bring the water closer to the garden's base on a more controlled, gentle slope. This canal digression is a profound layer. It shows planners not just working against nature by lifting water, but first working with nature by redirecting it. They reshaped the land to serve their hydraulic purpose, creating a calm, reliable pool of water at the perfect starting point for the great mechanical climb. The true genius, then, may not have been in a single miraculous pump. It was in a holistic understanding of the entire watershed. From the distant mountains to the final droplet on a leaf, they saw a connected system. They calculated the river's moods, they moved earth to guide it, and they built machines in steps to conquer the height. The lost hydraulic system was a conversation with a river. A long, ingenious argument with gravity, won not by shouting but by a whisper of patience repeated over and over all the way to the sky. The sun was relentless. It demanded a constant answer. A machine could lift the water, sure, but a garden doesn't drink on a schedule. The leaves need moisture with every hour of daylight. So a system pumping directly from the river to the plants, that would be inefficient, wasteful. The river flow might vary. A pump could break. The solution was storage. The garden needed a heart, a series of hidden hearts. The cisterns, the reservoirs, the silent batteries of the entire operation. Think of them as hydraulic capacitors. They stored potential. Water lifted during the cool of the night when evaporation was low, when labor or river current was available, that water could be held, saved. Then, as the sun climbed and the heat became a visible haze, the gates could be opened. The stored water would flow, driven by gravity from these elevated tanks, through the network of channels to every terrace. That smoothed out the demand. It turned a frantic, constant lift into a managed, rhythmic pulse. Archaeology gives us a clue. Excavations at Babylon uncovered large, deep pits lined with a thick layer of bitumen. They're often interpreted as granaries, storage cellars, but their waterproof nature suggests another possibility. A bitumen-lined pit is a cistern. It holds water without letting it seep into the earth. Now place such a tank within the vaulted substructure of the garden. At the base, a massive reservoir captures the output of the first stage Norias. Higher up, smaller tanks receive the water from the secondary lifts. Each terrace might have had its own modest holding pool, fed from the tank below, supplying its own network of channels. This creates a cascading system of reserves. A failure at one stage doesn't immediately doom the entire garden. The upper tanks hold a buffer. They buy time for repairs. This hidden water table did more than just store. It regulated pressure. Water seeks its own level. A tall, narrow column of water creates high pressure at its base. So by controlling the height of water in these cisterns, by how much they were filled, the engineers could control the force with which water entered the distribution pipes. Too little pressure and the water wouldn't reach the far ends of the terraces. Too much and it could burst the clay pipe joints. The reservoirs acted as pressure regulators. A calm interface between the violent work of lifting and the gentle task of irrigation. They were the shock absorbers for the entire hydraulic organism. That transforms our view of the monument. The hanging gardens weren't just a building with plants. They were a living system with a metabolism. The lifting devices were the lungs drawing in the resource. The bitumen-lined channels were the arteries and veins, and these hidden cisterns were the organs, the liver storing and filtering, the heart pumping with a steady rhythm. The garden didn't just sit on the landscape, it functioned. It had an internal logic, a flow of fluids, a cycle of intake and output. It was a mechanical ecosystem. This level of logistical foresight implies not just builders but managers, planners who understood cycles, who could calculate evaporation rates, who could schedule maintenance crews around the water table's ebb and flow. The true wonder shifts from the visible greenery to the invisible, intelligent distribution that made it possible. But such a complex, wet system buried within a structure of brick and earth, that presents its own profound danger. What happens when water, the very source of life, turns against the stone that holds it water is a patient destroyer. It finds the smallest crack and it never stops. For a garden built on hollow vaults and layered terraces, this was the single greatest threat. The whole paradise rested on a paradox. It needed torrents of water to live, but a single leak in the wrong place could bring the whole mountain down. The real challenge wasn't lifting the water up, it was keeping it where it belonged. This silent war against seepage defined the garden's true. The Babylonians were masters of this defensive craft. Their civilization was built on mud brick, a material that dissolves in water. So they developed a layered system, a technology of dryness. The first layer was often reeds, thick mats laid over the structural brickwork of the vaults. Reeds are flexible, they distribute weight, and they create a buffer between the wet soil above and the vulnerable brick below. But reeds alone aren't a barrier. They're a foundation for the real shield. That shield was bitumen, the natural tar that seeps from the ground there. For them, it was the ultimate waterproofing agent. They would heat it until it became a thick black liquid, then pour it and brush it over the reed mats, creating a continuous sticky membrane. They'd layer it. One coat, let it cool, then another. Archaeologists find this signature layer in the ruins, a dark, impermeable stripe in the soil, marking where a reservoir or a crucial floor was sealed. For the hanging gardens, this bitumen lining would have been everywhere. On the interior of every water channel, on the floors of the cisterns, and most critically, across the entire ceiling of the vaulted chambers that held the soil. It was the garden's raincoat, an artificial horizon that said to the water, "You go this far and no further." But bitumen can become brittle. It can crack under the weight of tons of soil and the constant vibration of machinery. So the builders added a third layer of defense, the bricks themselves, not just sun-dried mud bricks but fired bricks, kiln-baked into ceramic. These were expensive, so they were used strategically. For the most critical surfaces, the lining of major water channels, the edges of terraces, they set these hard bricks not in ordinary mud mortar but in asphalt mortar. A mix of bitumen and sand. This created a monolithic, waterproof wall. Every joint was made from the same waterproof substance as the coating. It was a belt and suspenders approach. They left nothing to chance. The consequence of failure was unthinkable, and it wasn't just about a damp basement. A slow leak from a garden bed high up would seep into the brickwork of a supporting vault. Water in brickwork in a hot climate does two terrible things. First, it causes salts within the clay to dissolve and migrate. As the water evaporates, those salts crystallize. The crystals grow, they expand with incredible force, and they push the bricks apart from the inside. It's a slow, relentless explosion. The vault weakens, and eventually a structural collapse begins. A single terrace falling could trigger a cascade. The second disaster was agricultural. The waters of the Euphrates carry dissolved salts. If this water seeped into the soil and then evaporated, it would leave those salts behind. Over time, the garden's own irrigation would poison its roots. The soil would become a white, crusted wasteland. The paradise would literally salt itself to death from within. This makes the waterproofing not a construction detail, but the guardian of the entire endeavor. Every brushstroke of hot tar, every carefully set asphalt joint, was a vote for the future. A declaration that this wonder was built not for a season, but for generations. The true marvel may not have been the visible garden, but the invisible, perfect dryness they maintained beneath it for decades. Dryness that in the end, even their brilliant technology could not sustain forever against the patience of water. The soil was a risk. A deep, fertile layer is heavy. When it gets waterlogged, it becomes a crushing weight. And this was on a stone terrace high in the air. That weight had to be managed with precision. The same precision as the water moving through it. These gardens weren't a natural hillside. They were built, manufactured. And the earth was the most critical part. Engineers had to create a medium. Lightweight, stable, nurturing. It had to support mature trees without collapsing the vaults underneath, or drowning the roots in stagnant water. They probably started with a layer of aggregate, broken pottery shards, gravel, maybe porous volcanic stone if they could bring it in. This coarse layer was the foundation. laid right over the waterproofed bitumen ceiling. Its purpose was drainage. Any water seeping down through the soil would hit this layer and be channeled away, guided into weep holes that fed the garden's internal drains. This stopped a dangerous pool from forming on the waterproof membrane. A pool would add immense weight. Risk a catastrophic failure. This was the first line of defense, keeping the substructure dry and stable. On top of this, they built up the soil, but not just any dirt. To reduce weight, they mixed the rich riverbank soil with lighter things: chopped straw, grain chaff, dried reeds. These organic bits lightened the load, improved aeration, helped retain moisture like a sponge, which meant less irrigation. It was an early form of engineered topsoil designed for a specific extreme place. The composition would have been a guarded recipe, trial and error. Knowing the wrong mix could mean collapse or dead plants. Then there were the roots. A tree's root system is powerful. It can split stone over time. Letting deep taproots go unchecked into the substructure was an invitation for disaster, so the gardeners almost certainly used root barriers. These could have been physical liners, tightly woven reed mats, maybe thin sheets of lead placed at strategic depths. Their job was to deflect roots sideways, make them spread out laterally in the engineered soil instead of drilling down. This required an intimate understanding of the plants, knowing which species had aggressive roots, which were more docile. This changes how we see the garden's plants. They weren't a wild thicket, they were a curated collection, each species chosen not just for beauty or fragrance, but for compatibility with this artificial world. Shallow-rooted shrubs, fruiting trees on dwarfing rootstock, vines trained along trellises. These were the ideal citizens. The soil's chemistry would have been managed too. They might have added amendments: ash for potassium, ground bone for phosphorus, to maintain fertility in what was essentially a giant, elevated planter box, one that couldn't be replenished by natural processes. The result was a complete closed-loop ecosystem, built by hand. Every element from the gravel at the bottom to the leaves at the top existed in a state of engineered balance. The water was delivered and drained by design. The soil was formulated for function. The plants were chosen for control. This was nature, but nature directed by 1,000 deliberate decisions. The ultimate expression of human will over the environment, not through domination, but through meticulous, loving simulation. To stand there would have been to witness a profound illusion, the feeling of a natural paradise, knowing every inch was the product of human thought. And this illusion, this perfect balance, was the most fragile thing of all. The silence of an empty garden is one thing, but the silence of a working machine is something else. Every part of that lost system, every screw and wheel needed a force to move it. That force is the final question. Was it human, animal, or the river itself? The answer changes how we see the wonder. It shows the engine behind the beauty. Human labor is the most direct answer. A vast hidden workforce. Teams of people, maybe in shifts day and night, turning capstans or climbing on treadmills. The scale would have been immense, not dozens, hundreds, maybe thousands. They would have lived in a shadow city next to the garden, their whole existence organized around the rhythm of the pumps. The sound would have been effort, the creak of ropes, the shuffle of feet on wood, the calls of overseers. It speaks to a society with the power to marshal that force and the will to devote it to royal prestige. The human cost, the sheer exertion to keep a paradise aloft, adds a layer of contrast to the serene image above. Then there's animal power. Oxen, patient and strong, walking in endless circles, hitched to a capstan or driven up the steps of a great treadmill. A single ox could provide the steady torque for a large chain pump or a heavy screw. That changes the logistics. You need fewer overseers. The power is more consistent, less prone to fatigue, but it brings its own demands: stables, fodder, veterinarians. The sound becomes different. The low groan of timbers, the snort and shuffle of beasts, the smell of animals woven into the scent of flowers. It represents a different investment, not in people, but in livestock and the agriculture to support them. A system built for endurance, where the initial expense was offset by years of service. The third candidate is the most elegant: hydraulic power, using the river's own current. The great Noria standing in the Euphrates, its paddles pushed by the flow, lifting water with no living muscle. This is automation, sustainable, silent save for the groan of wood and the splash of water. It whispers of an engineering philosophy in harmony with the environment. A river-powered system implies a brilliant understanding of physics and a confidence in mechanical reliability. Once built, it would run as long as the river flowed, demanding only maintenance, not daily fuel in food or human spirit. Each power source paints a different picture. A human-powered garden is a monument of collective effort and of hardship. An animal-powered one is an agricultural and mechanical hybrid. A river-powered garden is a feat of pure intellect, a clever trick played on nature. The choice among them wasn't just technical, it was cultural. It reflected what that society valued, what resources it had, and what it was willing to expend to make a dream real. The true power might have been a combination. A Noria for the first massive lift from the river, oxen for the secondary stages, and humans for the fine control and maintenance. That hybrid approach would show a holistic mastery, using every form of energy in a symphony of motion. To uncover which force drove the pumps is to listen for the heartbeat of the civilization. A heartbeat that might have been the rush of water, the lowing of oxen, or the silent, determined steps of countless unseen people. That perfect balance they engineered left no obvious trace. The silence from Babylon is absolute. After decades of excavation, teams sifting through the earth where the gardens were supposed to be, no definitive proof has ever been found. No foundation stone with a label. No grand network of bitumen-lined irrigation channels you could point to and say, this is it. This void of evidence is the paradox at the heart of the story. How does something so monumental, so famous, just vanish without a clear footprint? The first answer is material. Think of what that system was made from. Wood for the lifting wheels, the axles, the treadmills, reeds under the soil. Even the critical pipes were baked clay, a material that shatters into fragments over centuries. In the damp soil of a river plain, wood rots. It turns to pulp, then to earth. Noria, the size of a building after 2,000 years, might leave a few discolored patches in the soil. To an archaeologist, that's a maybe, a suggestion, not proof. The entire mechanical heart could have been biodegradable, returning to the earth as completely as the leaves it once watered. Then there's the cycle of rebuilding. Babylon was a prize. Conquered, sacked, rebuilt for centuries after Nebuchadnezzar. Each new ruler left their mark. They leveled old structures to raise new ones. They scavenged materials. Fired bricks and cut stone were valuable. If the gardens fell into disuse, if the hydraulic system failed, its remains would have been a quarry. The bitumen-lined terraces stripped for waterproofing. The ceramic pipes pulled up and reused. The stone from foundations carried off for other projects. This dismantling, stone by stone, would have erased the gardens from the landscape as thoroughly as any natural disaster. Then there's misidentification. What if archaeologists have already found pieces and didn't recognize them? Those bitumen-lined pits at Babylon, always called greeneries, could some have been the central cisterns, a network of conduit fragments labeled as palace drainage? Could it be part of the distribution web? Without an inscription, without a clear context pointing to a garden, these features blend into the background noise of a massive, hydraulically sophisticated city. The evidence might be in plain sight, waiting for a new theory to connect the dots. And that leads to the most compelling reason: the wrong city. If theory is correct and the gardens were in Nineveh, then a century of archaeology at Babylon has been searching for a ghost in the wrong house. The effort was sincere, meticulous, but misdirected. The real traces point north. The aqueduct at Sennacherib's inscriptions describing his bronze screw. The Assyrian ruins at Nineveh have evidence of spectacular gardens and advanced water management. So perhaps the lost hydraulic system isn't lost at all. It's been quietly documented for years under a different name, attached to a different king in a different set of museum drawers. This absence of proof isn't an end. It's a different kind of clue. It forces us away from simple discovery and into inference, into theoretical reconstruction. We have to build the garden not from excavated stones, but from the principles of physics, from the materials available, from the known capabilities. The void itself tells a story. It speaks of ephemeral materials, of imperial recycling, of the fragile nature of even the greatest wonders. The silence asks us to listen more carefully, not for the crash of falling stone, but for the whisper of a logic that once made the impossible seem merely difficult. The water was just the start. A garden is a conversation between earth and air. In that Mesopotamian heat, the hanging gardens would have done something. They would have made their own weather. Every leaf on those terraces, every palm frond, every petal was a small humidifier. Plants release water vapor, it's called transpiration. A single tree can exhale hundreds of gallons in a day. Now take an entire mountain of greenery. The effect would have been profound. Inside those sheltered terraces, a microclimate would have formed. Air would have felt thicker, cooler. A gentle mist might have hung in the higher branches, catching the light. This wasn't just irrigation, it was atmospheric engineering. The gardens generated their own humidity, recycling the water through a living cycle. The system fed the plants, and the plants conditioned the air around them. A closed loop of comfort, a bubble of curated climate above the sun-baked plains. That environment dictated every choice. The plants weren't just decorative, they were functional. Selected to thrive in this manufactured world and to enhance it, shade was a priority. The lower terraces, probably lined with tall trees like date palms, would have cast deep shadows over walkways. That canopy protected more delicate plants below from the sun. It reduced evaporation, conserving water. The selection was a balance: native resilience and exotic prestige. Fragrant shrubs like myrtle or jasmine could have lined the paths, their scent carried on the moist air. Vivid flowers, lilies, irises, roses, would have provided color against the green, their blooms sustained by the constant moisture. But these plants didn't just appear. A wonder this scale required a supply chain. There had to be a nursery, a dedicated space, maybe on the lower grounds, functioning as a botanical laboratory. Gardeners would propagate seedlings there, acclimate new specimens from distant lands, nurse sick plants back to health. This might have been a precursor to a greenhouse, using shaded cloth or water channels to control the environment. It was the garden's engine room for life, ensuring a constant supply of vibrant flora to replace any that faltered. The existence of that nursery speaks to a long-term vision. This wasn't a one-time planting. It was a living collection that required curation and renewal. The result was an artificial biome, a complete, self-reinforcing ecosystem built by human hands. The stone terraces were the geology. The engineered soil was the earth, the hydraulic network was the rivers, and the plants were the flora working together to generate their own atmosphere. It stood in stark contrast to the world outside. One step from the garden's shaded walkway, you'd feel the dry heat, see the dust. One step inside and you were in another world. A world of dappled light, damp stone, the quiet sound of dripping water. This was the ultimate testament to the desire not just to build, but to create. To reshape local ecology into a personal paradise, an act of profound imagination, made real by clay pipes and bitumen, by an understanding of nature so deep it could simulate her most generous moods. Yet a system this complex, this interdependent, had a single point of failure: its own success. The very humidity that sustained it could also become its most patient enemy. The hanging gardens were a garden that gravity, a message written in leaves and water. It was never just a beautiful retreat, it was a manifesto, a physical argument about power. In the ancient world, a king's legitimacy came from his ability to provide, to protect. Commanding armies was one thing, but commanding the rivers, commanding the seasons, that was closer to divinity. To make a desert bloom on a mountainside you built, that was performing a miracle on demand. It showed control over the elements that sustain life. That wasn't just impressive, it was legitimizing. A visitor walking those shaded terraces, feeling that cool, manufactured air, received a silent lesson. The king doesn't just rule the land, he improves it, he transcends its limits. To his own people, the message was security, abundance. Look what we can build, look what we can sustain. Your loyalty is rewarded with this impossible beauty. To foreign emissaries, the message was intimidation. Look at the resources we command, the ingenuity we possess. This is not a kingdom you can challenge. And the hydraulic system was the unseen engine of all this. The quiet machinery in the walls under the river. That's what made the spectacle possible, the practical truth behind the ideological claim. The technology served a narrative. The narrative was that the king's will could reshape reality. Think of the water, lifted against its nature, flowing uphill. In a culture that saw rivers as gods, that was a profound act. It wasn't just engineering, it was a symbolic victory. The king tamed the divine river, bending it to water his own personal Eden. It made his power seem natural, inevitable, blessed. That intersection, innovation and ideology, that's where the gardens find their deepest meaning. They represent a moment when human ingenuity was harnessed not for survival or conquest, but for crafting a symbol. So the lost hydraulic system is more than screws and wheels. It's a key to an ancient worldview. A worldview where prestige was built, literally, from the ground up. Where political authority was reinforced not just by laws and soldiers, but by the awe-inspiring manipulation of the environment. The garden stood as a living testament to one idea, that in this place under this rule even the laws of nature could be persuaded to make an exception. A manifesto needs proof, a theory needs a test. The story of the hanging gardens is fragment, it's speculation. But in workshops, in labs, a different kind of inquiry has started. Engineers and historians have taken up the challenge. They're not using shovels, they're using simulation. They're trying to build that lost system. To see if the whispers from history can hold the weight of physical law. These modern reconstructions are a dialogue across time. They ask the past a question, not with words, with water, with wood, with motion. The process often starts in the digital realm. With computer-aided design, modelers create a virtual garden. They input the known parameters, the estimated height of the terraces, the volume of water needed for different plants, the known flow rate of the Euphrates River. Then they test the hydraulic theories. They simulate a chain of Norias. They model a massive Archimedes screw. They calculate the torque required to turn it against the weight of the water. These digital experiments are powerful. They can reveal instant failures. A proposed screw of a certain diameter might need more force to turn than a team of oxen could provide. A network of clay pipes, under the simulated pressure of a head tank 50 feet high, might show catastrophic stress points at the joints. The computer becomes a time machine for stress testing ideas. It filters out the impossible before a single physical piece is built. Then comes the tangible test, the move from pixels to materials. Enthusiasts and researchers build small-scale working models of the proposed devices. Using period-appropriate materials, wood, clay, rope, they construct functional Norias. They submerge them in flowing water channels to see how much they can lift, how reliably they turn. Others craft precise replicas of the Archimedes screw. They experiment with different angles and lengths to find the most efficient design for lifting water with human power. These are not just models. They are experiments in ancient physics. Watching a wooden screw carved by hand lift a steady stream of water is to witness the theory become real. It shows the core technology was within their grasp. The principle works. So the question shifts from could they to how many and how big. One of the most revealing aspects is the discovery of secondary challenges. The models work in a clean workshop, but add the real-world conditions of ancient Babylon. Silt in the river water. That silt would quickly clog the delicate seals of a chain pump or coat the spiral of a screw, drastically reducing its efficiency. A physical model shows how quickly maintenance becomes the dominant task. It highlights the need for filtration systems at the intake. For easy access points to clear blockages, the models teach lessons about labor, not just lift. They show the system's true genius may have been in its serviceability, in designs that allowed for constant cleaning and repair with simple tools. These projects bridge disciplines. They bring together historians who decipher the texts, archaeologists who understand the material culture, and mechanical engineers who understand fluid dynamics and structural load. This collaboration is a form of historical detective work. A broken potsherd and a calculus equation can inform each other. A modern engineer, feeling the strain of turning a large wooden screw, gains an intimate physical understanding of the workload. The workload that ancient inscriptions only hint at. It grounds the legend in the muscle and sweat of operation. While these reconstructions cannot prove what was, they powerfully illustrate what could have been. They transform the gardens from a static image in a history book into a dynamic, functioning machine. Each turning wheel, each gallon lifted, is a vote of confidence in the ingenuity of those ancient builders. The experiments do not find the lost system, but they build a compelling case for its possibility. They show the story, for all its mystery, is not a fairy tale. It is an engineering problem the ancients were equipped to solve, brilliantly equipped, and if they solved it, the ultimate fate of their solution becomes an even more poignant mystery. What force could dismantle a machine of such profound and sturdy cleverness? A different mind, centuries later, sketched something similar. Leonardo da Vinci. His notebooks are full of spiral pumps, automated water wheels, designs for canals. He was obsessed with moving water. You see screws inside of screws, mechanisms for lifting it, for spreading it with less work. He imagined machines that could water fields on their own, that could use a river's flow to do the labor of 100 men. We call that genius a spark of the Renaissance. But then you look back to the dust of Mesopotamia and you see the shape of the same problem. You hear an echo of the same answer. The Babylonian engineer and the Italian polymath, 2,000 years apart, they were speaking the same mechanical language. They were both trying to solve the oldest challenge: how to make water go up. And that parallel, it's not just a coincidence. It shows something constant in how we invent. The physics don't change. Gravity pulls water down. To lift it requires work. The materials you have, wood, metal, rope, they set their limits. And whether it's 6th century Babylon or 15th century Milan, a brilliant mind looks at those limits and starts to draw. The curve of a screw, the loop of a chain, a paddle turned by the current. The answers converge. Not because they shared knowledge, but because they shared a logic. The laws of nature pose the same puzzle, and human ingenuity, when driven by need or by curiosity, often walks down similar paths to find a solution. Leonardo had an advantage, of course. He had a wider world to learn from. He could read Archimedes. He could study Roman engineering texts. The Babylonian masters had no library like that. They were pioneers working right at the bedrock of discovery. So their lost system, if it was real, is like a first peak. And Da Vinci's sketches are a later peak, maybe more refined. But the mountain range itself is the same. It's the human ambition to control our environment, to redirect the flow of life. And that changes how you see the Hanging Gardens. They stop being an isolated wonder. They become a landmark on a much longer timeline, an early spectacular chapter in the story of moving water, a story that goes from the Shadoof on the riverbank to the Aqueduct to Leonardo's pages to the huge pumps that keep our cities alive today. The scale gets bigger, the materials change, but the core quest is the same: to lift, to move, to command water. Looking through that lens, the garden's disappearance feels deeper but also less lonely. Its hydraulic system wasn't a freak event. It was a brilliant form of a timeless impulse, an impulse that would be found again and reimagined and refined century after century. So the real legacy of those Babylonian engineers might not be the garden that vanished. It might be the idea that stayed, the idea that with enough understanding and enough will, we can build a staircase for a river. That pursuit, though, that timeless pursuit, it always meets a final adversary, one that no screw, no chain, no royal order could ever truly defeat. The river's staircase was something worth stealing. Even if the Hanging Gardens fell apart, the ideas behind them, how water moves, how pressure works, the mechanics of it, those didn't just disappear. That kind of knowledge travels, not always in books or on ships. It travels in people. An engineer captured from Babylon, taken to Persia. A merchant who saw the great wheels turning and described them later, in a market somewhere else. A scholar in Alexandria, copying a text that was already a copy of a manual from Babylon, a manual that's gone now. That's the shadow legacy, the idea spreading out. The clearest thread goes to Rome. The Romans were masters of moving water. Their aqueducts are the direct descendants of that earlier ambition, to move water across impossible distances. But was it a direct line? There's an aqueduct built by Sennacherib in Assyria. It's centuries older than the earliest Roman aqueduct. It's proof that Near Eastern civilizations were thinking on that scale long before Rome was a republic. The Romans perfected it with their concrete and their precise slopes. But the core concept, that a state should command water, bring it to a city from far away, that ideology of hydraulic power might have roots in the East. It's not that a Roman engineer visited and took notes. It's that the success of those projects became part of the atmosphere, the thinking behind building an empire. The idea that a great capital needs great waterworks was demonstrated first, and spectacularly, in Mesopotamia. Later, in the Islamic Golden Age, the connection feels stronger. The Persian gardens, the paradises in Granada and Kashmir, they're direct spiritual heirs to the Hanging Gardens philosophy. They're enclosed spaces, often on slopes, where water is the central. It flows in precise channels. It cools the air. It symbolizes life and order. The technology, the qanats, the gravity-fed channels, the ornamental pools, it's a refined evolution of that ancient desire to create a controlled, perfect nature. The Hanging Gardens were the ultimate prototype, a story that echoed down the Silk Road, inspiring caliphs and sultans to build their own versions of an earthly paradise powered by water. This network of influence, this speculation, is maybe the garden's most important survival. The physical machine turned to dust, but the conceptual breakthrough, that irrigation could be lifted from agriculture to art, that water management could be an engine for beauty and a political statement, that idea was immortal. It seeded a tradition. It showed human ingenuity could craft not just survival but delight, that a garden could be a machine for wonder. So we may never find a Babylonian screw in a Roman dig, but we can see the legacy in the cascading terraces of the Alhambra, in the reflecting pools of the Taj Mahal. They're all answering the same ancient, ambitious question, not just how to water a plant, but how to make water itself sing. And if that song began in Babylon, then its melody traveled much farther than any river. The ghost of a machine could still be there under the dirt. We've dug with shovels for centuries. Now there's another way to look, a way to see without moving the earth. That's digital archaeology, tools that listen to the ground or look from space to find the shadows of what was there. For the lost water system, this might be the key. Think about a buried clay pipe. A normal dig could miss it by inches, or the trowel might just shatter it, but ground-penetrating radar is different. It sends radio waves down. Those waves bounce back when they hit a change, a stone wall, a cavity, compacted earth. What you get is a sonogram of the ground, a fuzzy image an expert can read like a map of things unseen. In the soil of Babylon, a scan like that might show a straight line, a linear anomaly running from the riverbank toward the palace mound. That could be the ghost of a main water conduit, a channel lined with bitumen, now full of silt, but still different from the earth around it. Or it might show a circle, a large, round foundation that could have held the central post for a massive Noria. These are shadows, but shadows have a shape. They give us targets, places to look more carefully or to protect. From the sky, the view changes completely. LiDAR light detection and ranging can peel away the modern world. Mounted on a plane or a drone, it fires millions of laser pulses at the ground. Timing how long they take to bounce back builds a precise, three-dimensional map of the surface. In a forest, LiDAR can show ancient roads under the canopy. On the Mesopotamian plains, it could detect the very subtle topography left by old engineering. The gentle, linear dip of a long-filled canal, invisible on the ground, might appear in a scan as a faint groove running toward the city. Or the raised, rectangular outline of a big reservoir, its banks just a few centimeters higher than the field now. This technology doesn't find the machine. It finds the fingerprint the machine left on the landscape, the alteration of the earth that served its purpose. Then there are the eyes in space. Advanced satellite imagery, with sensors that see beyond visible light, can detect differences in soil moisture and plant health. A buried stone foundation changes how things grow above it. In a dry field, the wheat might be stunted over a hidden wall, but lusher over buried garden soil or a silt-filled channel that holds more water. By analyzing these spectral signatures, researchers can sometimes map entire buried cities. Applied to Babylon or Nineveh, this could highlight the geometry of the gardens. A distinct rectangular or terraced pattern of subsurface moisture aligned with the palace would be a stunning clue. It would outline the footprint of the paradise itself. These tools aren't magic. They offer hints, not answers. A radar anomaly might be a natural layer. A LiDAR depression could be an old river course. The data needs interpretation. It needs a human mind to ask the right questions, to connect the digital dots with what we know about Babylonian engineering. But this is a fundamental shift. For over a century, the search has been destructive. We dig, we sift, we hope. These new methods are collaborative. They listen first. They map the questions before we break the ground. They offer the hope of seeing the whole system, the potential layout of channels, reservoirs, lifting stations, before a single trench is opened. We could, in theory, map the garden's circulatory system while it's still asleep under the sand. This approach respects the site. It preserves it for future technologies, even more advanced than ours. The goal isn't to find a single screw, but to understand the blueprint, to see the grand design of that lost hydraulic mind. And if we can finally see its outline, we face the last mystery. Not how it was built, but why it was allowed to be forgotten. What force was great enough to silence a machine that brilliant, that celebrated? The gardens last because we never solved them. The story works because it's incomplete, it's a collaboration. The past gives us the frame, a king, a city, those green terraces, and we have to paint the inside. We build the machine in our mind, That shared creation is what makes it captivating. It's not a locked door, it's an open workshop. We all get to tinker with the possibilities. We become co-authors with the ancients. We try on the role of the engineer, the gardener, the king. We ask what we would have done. It's the romance of a lost paradise meeting the gritty satisfaction of a physics problem. A legend you can calculate. That dual nature is irresistible. It appeals to the dreamer who wants beauty and the pragmatist who needs to know how the pipes were sealed. The incomplete record isn't a flaw, it's an invitation. At its core, the lost system shows a human tension, ambition straining against limit. The desire to create a perfect, controlled world crashing into gravity, evaporation, material strength. The Babylonians or the Assyrians, they looked at a desert and saw a mountain of life. They faced the same forces we do: scarcity, a changing climate, growing populations. Their answer was to engineer a defiance. They built a machine to argue with nature, and for a while they won. That struggle, that audacity to send a river into the sky, it echoes our own challenges. We build sea walls. We move water across continents. We make climate-controlled environments in space. The scale is different, but the impulse is the same. The story is a mirror. It shows an old version of our drive to reshape the world. The mystery persists because it's about possibility, not just what was, but what could be. It asks a question that never gets old. How far can ingenuity go when it's fueled by need or love or will? The absence of proof becomes a space for hope. It allows for the idea that in some forgotten time, people really did build a staircase for a river, that they achieved something so brilliant, so beautiful, its echo has lasted longer than its stones. We keep searching, not just for broken clay pipe, but for confirmation of that idea, that humanity is capable of wonders that walk the line between art and machine, between nature and dream. The hanging gardens are gone, but the question they asked, can we make the impossible live, that question is still growing. Watered by every new theory, every digital model, every glance at the sky wondering what else we might build there. The marvel wasn't the leaves, it was the logic. We go through screws, wheels, chains, and there's a deeper story there, a story of invisible intelligence. The hanging gardens, the visual beauty that would have been fleeting, without the genius inside the walls. That genius was applied thought, a mastery of physics, of material, turning a river's flow into a mountain's lifeblood. Whether it was Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar or Nineveh under Sennacherib, the implication is profound. It forces a quiet revolution. In how we see the past, we have to reevaluate what ancient civilizations could achieve. Their technological prowess wasn't primitive. It was precise, ambitious, deeply sophisticated. They had a profound mastery over their environment, not through force, through understanding. They listened to the river's logic and built a conversation with it. This lost hydraulic system is a testament to that dialogue. A dialogue written in water, clay, bronze. A smoking gun, a foundation stone that says garden machinery here that might still be buried. But the absence of proof has become its own evidence. It asks us to think, to reconstruct, to engage with the puzzle. The enduring mystery, it does more than frustrate archaeologists. It inspires a specific awe, the awe of a question that refuses a simple answer. It reminds us that history's greatest stories, they often have missing pages. Those gaps are where curiosity lives. They invite us in, not as passive listener, as active participants. So let this exploration be a starting point for your own. The sources are waiting. The debate between Babylon and Nineveh, it's rich with clues. The reconstructions by modern engineers, they're publicly shared. We encourage you to dive deeper, research theories, look at the images of the aqueduct debate the efficiency of a chain pump versus a Noria, and we'd love to hear your thoughts. Which theory for the lost system feels most compelling to you? Share your perspective in the comments. The conversation is how these ancient stories stay alive. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history's puzzles, consider subscribing. We're always exploring that line between legend and logic, searching for the machines hidden inside the myths. Thank you for watching.